Trustee Morgan McIntosh, who is also Chair of the Lake County Township Association.
Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. After that, I'm going to have to add a few things to my earlier planned remarks. So I'd like to, I was asked to recapture a bit of what happened. As you are aware, on the 16th of May, the Budget Commission held a meeting to which myself and other members of the ad hoc committee made a presentation to the details. So I'm going to take us through a very brief version of that presentation. As we all know, the prosecutor deemed that the 1982 formula was invalid, and that we needed to go ahead and work on another alternative formula, to which the Mayors and Managers Committee formed the ad hoc. We needed to undo the 1982 formula. That formula, a number of people in our committee that were very sharp with Excel and good with math made a very strong attempt to reverse engineer based on the result of it, to try to determine what was the basis, what was the thinking of it, and we weren't able to do that. There was great disparity in funding. If you take a look on a per population basis, which we figured was a consistent baseline, you had communities getting $60 per resident, you had communities getting $314 a resident, and you had communities getting as low as $9 a resident. There was no way to determine, either by population, property values, government entity, being it a township, a village, or a city, the county. There was no continuity in any way to determine what was the basis of this formula. So we immediately determined that readopting that formula was not equitable. We then continued a pretty lengthy debate covering what kinds of metrics we would want to use. We discussed population, we discussed property values, we discussed lane road miles, all kinds of things, what might give us something viable to work with. And while we agreed there was no perfect formula, we settled on the fact that population was the easiest to draw upon data. So one point in this projection of formulas, we talk about numbers, they're simply projections. We all know that we don't know how the state is going to apportion LGF dollars from year to year. We have a loose understanding that next year will probably be very close to this year, and beyond that, any numbers that we're looking at are certainly projections. All of us are aware of what happened during the Kasich administration when the LGF was cut dramatically. So we could see that again, we could see another change. So when we look out 7 and 10 years, it's very important to understand that we're just projecting based on current formulations as to what those numbers might be to test how a formula would work today. I will also add that at every instance we talked about a particular formulation or math, those projections and numbers accompanied a narrative of how the formula would work. So there was never a point where members of the ad hoc committee did not have hard numbers in front of them. In fact, all of us stared at an Excel spreadsheet the entire time, and I guarantee you every representative was looking at their community's line and running it out to understand how this formula worked. As Mayor Fiala said, we had heated conversation, which I think is very helpful in the political process. We had vigorous debate. As Mayor Fiala had mentioned, he, on the west end of the community, had empathy for communities on the east end that have grown and not seen a portion of their LGF dollars increase. I think everybody in that room sought cooperation, and we worked together as a county. I think of President Roosevelt's words when England was saying, we talked about D-Day today, so we're talking about freedom. So when the United Kingdom was under threat of tyranny in Europe, and President Roosevelt's rationalization for helping was, if my neighbor's house is on fire and I have a garden hose to lend him, I would suggest that as a very appropriate analogy to use about how the ad hoc committee worked, because even though communities on the west end had felt shortchanged, or east end, I'm sorry, had felt shortchanged for 42 years, there was a great deal of empathy and respect given to the communities on the west end that have problems and we're looking at substantial cuts to their budget, and that's where we struck what I think was a pretty equitable balance. I know, and Commissioner Hammercheck was a strong advocate of balance. I believe the positions that were communicated to you by you independently to our board, suggesting cooperation, suggesting that the county would be amenable to remaining at their current funding levels, set a tone of leadership, and I think you led the county well by taking that position of saying we want the local communities to work it out and take care of each other. And by that instance, we did. We followed your lead and we worked together. So I believe since we couldn't understand the 1982 formula, one of the things that we valued was endurance. We've put together something that is understandable, that will endure time. It seeks a balance. It surrenders funds from certain communities that have had a disproportionate advantage over communities that have not over time. And 15, 10 years, 20 years from now, we'll be able to look at those other people that are in these shoes. We'll be able to look at this formula and understand what this committee did. I would like to reiterate that Auditor Galloway has continually asserted that we need to move this along expeditiously, and I know that he couldn't be here today, and I'd just like to say that it's important that you take this first action here. This first public debate of this is very important, because if we go down the need, we're talking about if we don't adopt this and we default to the state statutory formula, we're taking a rewind further back than 42 years to 1966 and to a state legislature that made decisions a lot before we walked on the moon, as Auditor Galloway said last week, and we would be stuck with working through a formulation like that is fraught with inter-county litigation and unbalanced, and would ultimately hurt the local communities. And based on the increase the county would get, I would suggest that you'd probably be seeing a lot of local communities petitioning you for dollars for their projects based on what that would do to our local budget. So I think this is fair-minded. It gives the communities independence and durability. And I'll also add to what Mayor Fiala said with respect to the Metro Parks, is we took the same empathy with them and said, hey, there needs to be a fiscal responsibility, maybe a bit of a reckoning here. Gave them a window and an opportunity to petition for funds in the future, but levied cuts on them as well, and made steps forward to be fiscally responsible. So with that, if you'd like, I could take through the formula like Mayor or City Manager Ken Flipek did at the budget hearing. I'm not sure that's necessary, but I would do so if the board would desire that.
Commissioners?
I've been there for the whole thing, so I'm there to see you guys.
I think for the benefit of the public, it would be worth the time.
Okay, happy to do that. I'm not going to read this verbatim. I know it's available as an exhibit, but I'll take you through the rationale. So beginning next year, as was communicated, the county shall receive 10.8507%, which is reflective of the percentage that the county receives. That will come off the top. So whatever money the state apportions will go. So I'll maybe just to simplify this or explain as I go through it. What the formulation does is put groups into buckets, and that's how we manage to create equity. So we looked at communities whose population would drive up, and we treated them in a bucket. We look at communities who were going to take a big hit, and we put them in a bucket, and then sort of manage the formula to produce a result. So the remaining distribution, the following villages shall receive the greater of the 2024 distribution amount or an amount derived from the paragraph below. And the sum of those distributions shall be taken from the remaining total distribution annually. The amounts of each village shall be reduced if the county population or total county allocation is reduced by the state. And the villages are Perry, North Perry, Grand River, Fairport Harbor, Lakeline, and Timberlake. And effectively, that holds those communities flat. There's an opportunity to grow if their population grows, if the numbers grow, but basically they're capped at 100% of their current number. And then the next group, the following cities and villages shall receive the greater 90% of their 24 allocation or an amount derived through the formula, same thing. If the number were to grow, they could get more. And those communities are Willoughby, Willowick, Wycliffe City, Eastlake, Wake Hill, and Kirtland Hills. The balance of the remaining distribution shall be distributed among the cities, villages, townships in the following manner based on population. And that will be used on the decentennial US Census, and I believe that was the mark of 7 years. When we took a look at that 7-year window, we knew there'll be a new population number there. That's where 7 years came from. It wasn't because we couldn't make something work, it was a point. And then the committee decided we wanted to take it out a full 10 years so that it had some durability to it. In 2025, Perry Township will receive 80% of their derived by population number and an additional 1% each year thereafter, not to exceed 80% of a population derived number. In 2025, Madison Township, Leroy Township, Concord Township, and Painesville Townships will receive 62% of a percentage derived in paragraph 1 and an additional 4% each year thereafter, not to exceed 86%. And then the remaining total distribution shall be divided, and that would be given to the cities, and they shall not receive more than 100% of their population. That was something we added in some caps. So there were some of the projections showed that at a certain point, communities could go beyond 100%, 102, 101. So what we did is cap that percentage at 100, so you can never exceed more than 100% of what a population formula would give you, and then it trickles down the excess to communities that receive the lowest percentage on a per population basis. And lastly, there were 2 park entities which aren't representative and don't have a vote in this process, but they are permitted by ORC to be represented in the LGF formula. And Lake County at one point determined that the Metro Parks and Painesville Township Park would be part of this fund. At different points during the formula they were added or allocated. So taking that on, knowing that there was all of this turmoil and how to reconcile it, what we determined was that Painesville Township Park would be eliminated from funding, and that Lake Metro Parks would receive an annual distribution of $100,000 for a 5-year period of 2025, 26, 27, 28, and 29. I believe at the end of that window, there'll be another Budget Commission will hold a hearing, so they would then have an opportunity to petition to continue, increase, or just simply surrender those fees. And that equates to about 43 cents per person, and every community will pay for that based on its population. And then also that represents about a 50% cut to their current. So they did suffer a bit there and have a runway down to 0, which we figured was fair. It's the same kind of equity that we treated the West End communities with in order to achieve some balance there. Well, I've covered a lot of grounds. Do any of you have questions?
Any questions for Mr. Trustee?
More comments, just to maybe keep the conversation.
Thank you.
So some of the things that we're talking about, the current formula, we had a range of $9 per person in a community all the way up to $314 per person. Do you want to maybe expand on that a little bit?
So, all due candor, my community was the one that had the $9. And I will say that members of the other communities, representatives from that even had admitted that at $300 it was hard per resident, it was hard to argue that that was an equitable scenario. So the townships, the members of the LCTA and I brought the initial formula into to talk about it, and then kind of said, here's what population does, and started to talk about caps in order to rebalance this thing and get towards it. So we took a position that the townships took a position that we wanted to see growth in our dollars, that we wanted to see more equitable representation in the LGF. And while we don't grow to 100%, I'll go back to my Roosevelt comment. I look at the West End cities. If I was sitting across the table and I was looking at a 40 to 60% cut to my number, of a number that represented 10, 15% of my budget, that would be a scary moment for me. That would be a challenge. And if that was to happen within 1 to 2 years, that would be a bit of a crisis. And I understand the challenges. I know we looked into this and said, let's talk. What are the problems? How does this challenge you? Commissioner Ragovich, I talked with you about it as a former mayor. I know Commissioner Hammercheck and I had a lot of conversations. I reached out to the mayors and other communities to try to have some empathy and understanding. We went through, the ad hoc committee started informal meetings in the fall last year. We substantively started working on a formula in mid-January. We had 8 meetings. I don't know, I lost track at 20. Commissioner Hammercheck, you were there, you've got copies of every one of these formulas, and after we got through some of the bitter bickering, I would suggest what happened was someone would raise a point, and you saw the harmony come, because at one point, members were like, okay, well, what about this? When someone raised the problem, a member on the other side of the proverbial table would say, well, what if we did this to fix your problem? And it got into a very rapid problem solving. When I take a look at the amount of work that got done in such a compressed amount of time, especially when this has been a hot topic for over a decade and people haven't had the willingness to take it up and say, well, this is going to be an arduous task. And then we go ahead and put something together and get legislation prepared in 5 months. It's a remarkable amount of progress, and that can only be accomplished with a great deal of cooperation.
To that end, when we began the process, it was clearly a matter of law. Is this a legal instrument? Then obviously progressed to discussing the numbers, but as has been very aptly pointed out by Auditor Galloway, this out of necessity became a political discussion.
Yes. I think the other thing too, and I want us to go back on the timeliness and the importance that we get this, and I think it's great that you're the first legislative body to take this up, because again, you set the tone by empowering the communities and taking a pretty neutral stance on this and saying, solve it, we want to work together. If we were to fail to adopt this formula, this is an up and down vote, as Auditor Galloway has said. If this fails in the next few weeks, if we're not able to get this going by early July, we need to commence the state process. We need to do the need hearings, which at this point he still fails after, I think, 2 months of requesting this information from communities to prepare the computation. So we even have a comparison. What would it look like absent of the need hearings? We still don't even have that, so we couldn't have it to compare to. We go down that road. It took 42 years to upend this formula that wasn't equitable to work it out. We go to state statutory, the county ends up taking their percentages. The thought that we have time to unwind that, or that we'll ever go backwards, I think is a bit of a fallacy. We need to recognize the reality of that. Once things sort of become established, that's what they get. This is the opportunity for local communities to take ownership of this process. It was collaborative, it was cooperative, it was fair-minded, it is balanced. I would argue that the former formula wasn't derived at all by need. When you take a look at the formula, and we couldn't figure out what its rationalization was, it was political. The former formula we've operated under for 42 years was political. If you look at the communities that get the big dollars, they were the big communities in 1982. They're not the big communities anymore. But recognizing we wanted that equity, we didn't seek to punish those communities, we sought to work together with them.
If I may, Mr. President, just...
Yes, Mr. Commissioner.
So just again, keeping the conversation going, I think it is to address Mayor Mara's concern. Yes, this did not follow the usual process that the board goes. I will admit no one was more surprised than I when I got the call from Jason Boyd that Auditor Galloway wanted to see this on the agenda today. I thought we had a little more time to digest this and look things through. I will tell you, our prosecutor's office, they've really kicked it into high gear. I can tell you, working with Dave Hackman, Kelly Eccles, and I believe Chuck Olson also reviewed everything, what the resolution before us captures the legal necessities. And I believe the exhibit, the actual language, captures what was publicly discussed at our Career Center. So those concerns were addressed rather expeditiously, albeit again, it's not our usual process. I think the boxes have been checked off. Dave, if I'm not stating that correctly, please. Okay. And one of the comments, about litigation, if we had to go with the state statutory, it is worth repeating that litigation overwhelmingly is one community accusing another community of overstating their needs. I don't know if you wanted to expand on that.
Yeah, I think actually Ken Fluke couldn't be here for Mentor, and he did a lot of lifting on this, did a lot of work, provided a great deal of leadership, and it was him that really pointed out the cooperativeness and the timeliness. And again, I don't want to put the Commissioners Board right now leading, because when this was taken up in 2012, it wasn't a contentious process, and the local government stepped away from it and said, we don't want to deal with it because there was no leadership, there was no sense of equity. And I think it's important to recognize that we're at this point of cooperation, and that it's time to get it done. We are under time pressures to get this done, and we have something. We don't have viable options. I know Mayor Morris spoke about, I saw one of 3 that he presented. He's talked in the last few weeks about other formulas. I've never seen an example of projection, a demonstration of that. I know it was showed to a few members who said they didn't like it, and not every member of that committee had the opportunity to view his work, so I couldn't even begin to comment on whether I thought it was constructive or not. I don't know what its result was, whereas the work of this committee has been very transparent, very down to numbers, very easy to figure out, and I do support the timeliness of getting this done now. I think it's critical.
And also in the interest of representing our auditor, he was not able to be here today. One of the key things that was pointed out is this formula, this alternate formula. This is the plan.
Yes.
And I think I can't say it any better than Auditor Galloway at the public meeting. It's up or down. That it cannot be amended, and if there is an amendment offered by any one of the communities, it's equal to a no. If you want to expand on that.
Yeah, so we're at a point now where I know a lot of members, excuse me, council members, trustees, whatever, are used to being able to do that. If we don't have uniformity across the county, we all need to be on the same page. This has to be ratified by a majority of the counties, with the biggest city in the county, the city of Mentor, and the county having the veto authority. So you folks at Matona passing it today starts, if Mentor passes it, then it's up to a majority of the remaining entities to adopt it through ratification. But there has to be uniformity. There can't be one community that has an exclusion or an exemption or a change. It's up or down. We can't reconcile different versions. This isn't Congress. This isn't the House and Senate where there's reconciliation of a bill. We don't have that option.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Mr. President,
Mr. Commissioner.
I'd like to commend the committee, and when they first proposed this, and I think it's important to note that the state of Ohio required us to look at this year, and they set the timeline. So that kind of forced this to move forward, and I think everybody knew that there's going to be a redistribution of the pie, so to speak. And the pie was never cut into slices to begin with. Right. So this is a way to do that. But when they first proposed this late last year, early this year, I said, this is going to take 2 years. This is going to take forever. How are you going to get people to... So I commend all the communities and their leaders to get together. It's just another thing I think we're proud of Lake County, is the communication of the leaders, and to get something that's done in 5 months. To where most everybody understands what they had to do, what their role was, how they were going to come out at the end of this, and everyone's somewhat satisfied, but somewhat unsatisfied, which any negotiation that's worth it, everyone walks away a little bit unhappy. So I think it could have gone many different ways, but I'm happy to see that it came out this way. I was there at the presentation at Auburn, and I thought everybody did a great job, and it was very clear and very concise to me. So
thank you, Commissioner. And I believe you bring up a very valid point, and I think nobody, and Mayor Fiala said the same thing. We've all said it. If everybody's a little bit unhappy, then you've probably done a good job. And I would suggest in today's political climate, I've said this many times about the work of this committee. In as contentious and polarizing as our politics are these days, the fact that a diverse group of people in Lake County came together and worked together, ultimately cooperatively through a bit of bickering and a little bit of posturing, the residents of Lake County should be proud of the work that their elected leaders did and how cooperatively they worked together. We acted as a county, not as self-interested, and as one of the communities that could have gotten more maybe. I feel proud of the work that we did, and I'm pleased to share with the success of the committee, and everybody deserves a round of applause and a pat on the back for their effort. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions for Trustee McIntosh, Mayor Mara, or Mayor Fiala?
Just one word for
Mr.
the,
Commissioner?
so,
You need your,
possibly.
Okay.
You might want to, because again, when this, from the matter of law, I think it is also appropriate to thank Prosecutor Colson, the prosecutor's office staff, the lawyers down there, because this was a heavy lift on their part. That when the question was posed to them, there was months of research. And when it was, the now infamous memorandum came out, there were a number of law directors that were in opposition. They had theories opposing it. There were requests, if not outright demands, for an Attorney General's opinion. And we did go through that process. Their concerns were given due consideration, but Prosecutor Colson's decision stands. I think we've all substantially accepted that. Going forward, I don't want there to be any cloudiness as to the validity of that opinion, because that is one of the things, is this an opinion? Well, that's a term of art, as our professor would point out, that that's a term of art, but the reality is that is our rule and guide. When our prosecutor says something is not a valid instrument, we have to abide by that. And as a member of the Budget Commission, I believe Prosecutor Colson pointed out that he could not support continuing with the 1982 formula, which again, by way of background, which is why we're saying for 2024, because of logistic reasons, there was no practical way to get an alternate formula in place. Else, we would have fallen to state statute. There was no opportunity, given the timing, to practically implement that. So there were a lot of necessities that brought us to where we are. And again, I think our prosecutor's office deserves a tip of the hat for all their efforts. I don't know if you want to add to that or.
I agree. I mean, it's been I know that all of our various law directors weighed in on this early and had comments, but we ended up working everything out, working together, and like I said, I couldn't be more proud of the work that